He's a father, professor, lawyer, judge, and entrepreneur. His students call him Professor Everett. I call him Dad. You'll meet him coming up next on Carolina People. Good morning. Welcome, Carolina People. This morning with the Myrtle Beach Herald. We're focused on the legal profession, and we're visiting with Robinson Oscar Everett, a professor of law at Duke University. Good morning.
Good morning, Greg.
Judge Everett, Professor Everett. What can I call you this morning? Yesterday we got into a lot. We covered a lot yesterday.
We did.
Thanks so much for coming back in this morning.
Great to be here.
There's still a lot to cover. Of course, again, it was so exciting getting Luke in to kick off the week. Obviously, Tammy Eves from the American Heart Association was with us on Tuesday, highlighting the upcoming Heart Walk and the Horseback Ride-a-thon and even the Heart Ball, which we hope you all will get back for again next February. But just yesterday, just touching the, I guess, skimming the surface of so much excitement on your part of the legal profession, and even the history of a little bit of the background of the legal profession, as well as the future of the law. A lot of exciting things.
Well, I was excited a few days ago when I was up in Chicago for the American Bar Association meeting.
Right.
And there's so many new things that lawyers are getting into, so many new specialties. For example, they just created a new committee on animal law.
Animal law?
Animal law. I didn't know anything about it. I don't know much about animal law, but that's another indication of the diversity of the legal profession.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there are a lot of international programs, lawyers going to China. They were recruiting people for a trip there. The legal profession is so different than when I became a member of it in 1950. And I can just imagine what it was when my mother became a member in 1920 and my dad in 1905. I mean, the differences are incredible.
Yeah, yeah. As well as your two sons and one of your daughters-in-law who will be entering the legal profession hopefully in 2008.
Yeah, they start class just at law school just a few days from now.
Less than 2 weeks from now, I know, on the 29th. It is amazing. I think 11 days from today. It is incredible. You know, we asked you yesterday if you'd given any words of wisdom to the two boys and your daughter-in-law, Sherry. Well, have you said anything in particular to keep them focused other than that idea that your mother, their grandmother, will be looking down on them there in the law library?
No, I really don't have any pointers for them. I think just to be alert and realize that there's going to be some very interesting points of view expressed. Try to develop personal relations with some of the faculty members. I think that always helps.
Right.
I was fortunate when I was in law school to come to know 2 or 3 members of the faculty very well, which is somewhat unusual at the law school I attended, Harvard, at that time.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's important. But I really don't have any tips for them.
How about some of the things you share with your first-year law students in criminal law?
Well, I try to give them a little bit of the constitutional background for criminal law in the United States. I talk a little bit about the history, try to give them some idea of the procedural framework within which criminal law is practiced. But that's about it. Then one other thing I try to do, and this may be unique to me, but on the opening day, I say we've got a very important matter to consider. That is the appointment of a social committee.
A social chair, or a whole committee?
Yeah, I have a social committee and a chair, and we try to have some events where they may come to my house or they may go somewhere with me where we can sort of fraternize, you know, and in an informal context talk about things, because I think it helps the students to have a one-on-one relationship with faculty members. So I try to do that, and it's worked quite well. I'll bring in maybe a guest to talk to them and be with us. And
you ought to tell Luke and Rob to set up a social committee there at UNC Law School. Well, and they can chair, you know, one section, and Rob can chair one, Luke can chair the other. That'd be exciting. But that's a great thing to do. Now, is that something you don't think other law school professors encourage the students?
I'm sure that some of them encourage. I think every law professor handles it a different way. They have their own unique approach. We live very close to Duke Law School, so it's easy to say, well, come on over, we'll have a party on our patio, and I'll bring in a guest, maybe a judge or a prosecutor. They could talk about criminal law with them, or a defense attorney.
It's a great idea.
In fact, unfortunately, I've had one or two of my former students who wound up in serving prison sentences.
Really?
And I've even had some of them come and talk about how is it that a lawyer can get in such trouble that he or she winds up in prison. I think only he. I've only had male ones that I can remember up to this point.
Only guys go to jail now. Yeah.
It may change, so I think it probably will.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's just very, very important to try to make law school as much of a congenial experience as possible.
Right.
I know when I was much younger, the relation among attorneys in most instances was a little bit more cordial than it is today. I mean, you knew the people, you had to work with them, even those you opposed frequently in court. You had to work with them frequently in order to get things disposed of. And
sure.
Nowadays, sometimes there is sort of an in-your-face approach. I don't think that's true in North Carolina very much, but in some of the big cities, I've been sort of amazed at what I've seen from
and the lack of collegiality between the attorneys.
I've taken a lead in trying to establish some inns of court, which are for law students, attorneys, and judges, sort of modeled on the old English inns of court, where the lawyers would meet together periodically for meals, and the idea being that if you dine together, you talk together and you become more friendly and more cordial.
Sure.
But
are judges invited to that, or they they are absolutely
in the inns of court? You typically will have several judges. You may have appellate judges, trial judges, senior lawyers, apprentice lawyers, and law students.
You know, we talked a little bit about yesterday, Dad, about your service on the bench when I think President Carter appointed you to serve on the U.S. Court of Military Appeals.
Right.
Share with me, you talked a little about early on, back in the early 50s, after your first year of teaching, after you served as a judge advocate, you served for a short while as were you an advisor of a sort to the Court of Military Appeals?
Well, I had a title, commissioner, which basically was a glorified name for a law clerk.
Okay.
And I worked with one of the three judges, a really great guy who had been the dean of the Tulane Law School, and also had been a colonel in the Air Force Reserve as a judge advocate. And he had been appointed by President Truman to serve on the court, and the court started in 1951, and I went on his staff from 53 to 55.
Okay.
My duties basically were helping him on writing opinions and preparing memoranda in connection with those.
Well, I want to talk about the Court of Military Appeals. Now, I think it's known as the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces.
Right.
But those dates you just worked out, you know, in my head as I'm thinking about that, you taught 50 to 51. Again, as you stressed yesterday, you began teaching at age 22 at the Duke Law School, but taught that 1 year, then were gone 5 years. You came back and began as a faculty member again in 1956. So next year you'll be celebrating 50 years of continuous service to the Duke Law School?
I guess that's about right. And I'm somewhere in that range, 49, 50.
Right now, yeah, sure. 49 years right now. Next year will be a big year.
I hope I'm able to make it through.
Yeah.
They're very kind to let me continue teaching, but I enjoyed so much the interplay with the students, trying to bring some new programs in. For example, one thing I've done is take my students out to the federal penitentiary of correctional facility at Butler, North Carolina, a few miles away, and the wardens have cooperated and let us take tours so they can see the inside of prisons. And I'm going to try to get a seminar started on courts and prisons to try to understand some of the factors in sentencing, understand some of the things that are important in the prison administration, things of that sort. And it's nice to be in a very creative law school where they give a lot of opportunity to bring in new programs. One of the things I'm proudest of, Greg, is founding a center there which has the acronym LENS, standing for Law, Ethics, and National Security. And about 10, 12 years ago, I'd been teaching seminars in national security law, and I thought, wouldn't it be great if we had a center here at Duke which could organize conferences, work with the American Bar Association, which has a national security law committee, work with other groups, help establish seminars at law schools on national security law. And we got it underway. And of course, after 9/11, our scope of activity really mushroomed, as you would imagine.
Sure, absolutely.
Our executive director, who was an old friend of mine, whom I'd known for a number of years during his Air Force career, Scott Silliman is his name. He has been on TV and NPR.
Oh yeah, TV and radio and everywhere, absolutely, and tons of print articles.
It's given a lot of visibility to what we're doing, and the conferences we've conducted, I think, have been very, very stimulating. We have them in the spring at Duke, and we have them in the fall in conjunction with the ABA, either in the D.C. area or Arlington, somewhere up in that area.
So we're talking about two acronyms: LENS, Law, Ethics, and National Security, and of course the other acronym, COMA, which has since changed. And of course, did you say that recently you all heard a case up in Chicago?
Well, yeah, we were talking about that. It was August 5th.
To talk a little about the court's role as a gatekeeper, and of course their TV in the courtrooms, but of course y'all's ability to hear cases almost always in Washington. You all changed venue last couple weeks ago.
Well, it's sort of interesting. We have a beautiful courthouse in Washington. Apparently, Harry Truman was requested to make it available. He had a great interest in military justice. He had been a captain in the Army, and he thought there should be a nice courthouse, so he made this courthouse available right at the corner of 5th and E in downtown Washington. So most of our cases are heard there. But in the late 80s, while I was chief judge, a professor of law from Virginia, now at GW, who was serving on our court committee, said, why don't you hear a case at the University of Virginia Law School? The Army JAG School is located almost adjacent there, and all these students, all these judge advocates who are attending the JAG School could come over and hear an actual argument.
Sure.
And we followed through on that. And then, since one of our members of the court was a West Pointer, he said it'd be nice to do this at West Point. This was Gene Sullivan, who you interviewed
he was with us in April.
A year ago, a few months ago. And so we went to West Point. Then the chair of our court committee, Jim Taylor, who was an associate dean at Wake Forest, said, if you're going to do it at these places, come to Winston-Salem and do it at Wake Forest, which we did. And we got underway with what we refer to as Project Outreach.
Great.
And we've done about 100 of these appearances the court has. I understand they did one on an aircraft carrier. I'm glad I wasn't there for that one.
Oh, my God.
But
in the air.
Oh, no, on the water, but...
an air, excuse me, I'm sorry, an aircraft carrier, yes.
The court may be up in the air sometimes, but not in the literal sense.
Yeah.
In any event, that's been a great program. We even expanded on that, doing something that I don't think any other federal court has done. We are established under a different provision of the Constitution that would be true of the federal district courts or courts of appeal. And so we have a little bit more authority than they do. I mean, we can do our own thing. And in the federal courts generally, there are no televised proceedings. We actually have had some televised arguments where we were requested to be on court TV or whatever.
Sure.
And my theory as chief judge, and apparently my fellow judges shared in that, was that it was important for the public at large to know what we did and know what the military justice system was about.
Sure.
Our service members deserve the very best in terms of justice. And if we aren't giving it to them, then we ought to be told about it by people who can look in the TV or watch us in action who say they're not doing it the right way, and we can learn and we can improve.
Right.
So we've had several TV appearances, and I think it's worked very well. Well, on August the 5th, Project Outreach arranged, or as part of Project Outreach, the chief judge arranged to hear a case in Chicago at the Court of Appeals for the 7th Circuit, a federal circuit court, at their courthouse.
Right.
Now, a couple of things about that. One is that the ABA was having its annual meeting in Chicago at the same time. And a lot of military lawyers and others were going to be present who were interested in what we do.
Sure.
The second thing, the chief judge of the 7th Circuit had himself been a Navy judge advocate in the reserve, and he was very cooperative. And so it was arranged that the court would hear this case in that courtroom there in Chicago.
Right.
And then in turn, I was asked to fill in. I'm a senior judge still. So if a judge gets sick or recuses herself or something else, then if I consent, they can have me come and serve. And they asked me to fill in on this case, and I agreed to do so. And so we were there in Chicago in this federal courthouse hearing a very interesting murder case.
Really?
A murder case involving a female non-commissioned officer who had killed her husband, a non-com of equal rank, and she had stabbed him 99 to 100 times. So, I mean,
it's pretty serious.
It's pretty serious, obviously. He had died. She'd been convicted of premeditated murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. And there were very interesting issues which our court had decided to review. She was represented by a very outstanding civilian counsel who I think had military background, a lady who was quite good, and then a military lawyer. There also were some students who, under the supervision of a law professor from John Marshall Law School, appeared as amicus curiae, friends of the court. They made an argument in behalf of the defendant.
Really? These are law students?
These were law students. They had a professor, a couple of professors, who were supervising them, but actually these were third-year law students, and they were quite good. And then the Army had counsel representing the government's interest. And so this was a very interesting experience. Obviously, if I knew, I couldn't say how it's going to come out, but it's still up for grabs, as it were, and 1,000-page record to review.
Wow.
Interesting trial.
How do you go about reviewing 1,000-page records, Dad? I mean, you can't read all of that, can you?
Well, you can try.
You sure try. Yeah, maybe you do. Forgive me. Yes.
Do the best you can.
Like how judges are able to knock down case after case after case.
Well, most of them don't have records like that, and most of them you can simplify it quite a bit. But here's a lengthy murder case with a lot of different issues. I went up before the hearing. I went up to Washington to do some review on the record, and I think I'll probably go back again in the next few days to do some more.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a serious task, but it's interesting to do it in that context.
Sure.
Now, usually it would be there at the courthouse in Washington.
And y'all had some fascinating cases that were heard in front of you there, or that y'all heard at the Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces during your tenure. Of course, you were principally there full-time from 80 to 91. 92, took senior status around that time, and are available for recusals or otherwise at the present.
It was a little tough because we had 3 sons in Durham, and my wife and my mother, and I had to be in Washington every week, so I got a lot of frequent flyer miles.
Yeah, you did. You've been passing a lot of those on to your firstborn, although he's now moved to Durham, so he won't need them as much.
He won't need them as much.
Yeah.
But it was a very interesting and demanding experience, and I was able to continue some teaching. I would teach a seminar for 2 hours on a Monday and then fly on up to Washington.
Okay. Well, I've always said you would teach Monday morning, Monday night, and Tuesday morning before flying up, so I'm wrong.
I think I did it all on Monday.
Everything was on Monday. And so y'all would hear cases on what, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday?
Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday,
Right.
to enable you to fly back home on Friday or
Well,
Saturday.
usually I'd be there till Friday or Saturday. I mean, I stayed as long as I needed to in order to get the work done.
Yeah.
I had some great staff people who helped me, but it was...
You did, absolutely.
It was a very interesting and demanding experience, and it gave me an opportunity to get the perspective of a federal appellate judge.
Mm-hmm.
And frequently, if I'm writing letters of recommendation for someone for a clerkship, if I think that person is particularly good, I'll put in the letter of recommendation that I think this person would be excellent to serve in your chambers, and I say that based on my own experience in what it takes to make a good law clerk. And it does help to have good staff people helping out. I know the Supreme Court has great people. I think John Roberts, who is being considered for Supreme Court, was a law clerk to one of the Supreme Court justices.
He was, that's correct.
And as I recall, Justice Rehnquist was a law clerk with perhaps Chief Justice Berger, at least with one of the.
It would be pretty close in age.
Right. Ken Starr, I think, was a law clerk for one of the Supreme Court justices.
And you never served as a law clerk, albeit in that position as a commissioner. You said it was a glorified law clerk back in the early 50s. You know, of course, your third born was with us on Monday, talking about the diaries of your father, Reuben Oscar Everett. You know, the opportunity of practice in law, as you said, in the early 50s, which continued until 71, until your father's death, with your mother and father, was probably pretty exciting. What was that like? And of course, now with 2 sons attending law school in less than 2 weeks, the opportunity assumably will rise again in 3 years when they have the opportunity to practice with at least one parent, not both parents.
Well, I hope I'll be around to
let's not even talk about that.
But it was very exciting. It was a little difficult to try a case with one of your parents. I know in one case I tried with my dad. I felt a little bit out of place, you know. Here was I, this young guy, fairly recently out of law school, and here was my dad with probably 50 years, 60 years of experience at that time, and you know, I felt sort of deferential, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
And then I tried one, I remember, with my mother, and I was examining a witness, and she said, ask him this question. I said, no, I don't want to do it. She said, ask him the question. So I finally said, okay, and I asked the question. And almost immediately thereafter, as a result, the judge ordered a mistrial, and we were back to square one.
No.
So I looked at my mother and I said, I'm not going to follow your advice again. But there was some interesting dynamics. So if...
but now that was rare. Your mother was normally right?
She was normally right. And in fact, it's funny, she tried, when she graduated from law school in 1920, She actually argued a case in the North Carolina Supreme Court in October and won it.
Right.
And then many, many years later, I had a case in the North Carolina Supreme Court, and I got sick at the last minute and couldn't go. And my mother argued that case, her last appearance there, I'm sure, and she won it.
Really?
And both cases involved promissory notes, as I recall. But it was interesting. She began her career in the Supreme Court of North Carolina in 1920, winning a case and on appeal, and then ended her career in our Supreme Court winning a case on appeal. Then she won quite a few in between.
Yeah, and I hate to say it again, we've run out of time. There's so many more questions I'd love to get into. We don't have a chance. Really appreciate you giving us an hour yesterday and this morning to highlight much of your fascinating life. Hope we'll get you back another time.
What a treat it's been to be with you.
Great to be with you, very definitely. See you at home. Stay tuned for more Carolina People with Robinson Oscar Everett coming up next. One of his students said it so well, his heart is full of gold. And so many of them are devoted to him as he is to them. Almost every place he goes, he sees a former student. He is an encyclopedic memory. It's incredible that he recognizes so many. Another law clerk said he is very busy, but he loves people. He knows no station in life. He is always very inquisitive, whoever you are. You have something he wants to know about. It's great to hear former students and law clerks, even his own son, as you heard his third-born Luke talking about him on Monday. It's amazing to think about the excitement of his life. Robinson Oscar Everett, we could highlight father, we could highlight judge, we highlight law professor today. It's been an exciting 2 days. Thanks so much.